Sarvabhutanam Hrideshirjuna Tishtati Ramayan Sarvabhutani Yantrarudani Mayaya. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Tam eva sharanam gacha sarva bhavena bharata tad prasadat param shantim stanam prapsyasi shashvatam. O sign of Bharata, surrender unto him utterly. By his grace you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. Iti te jnanam akyatam guyad guyataram maya vimshridyai tadasheshena yite chasi tatakuru. Thus I have explained to you the most confidential of all knowledge. Deliberate on this fully, and then do what you wish to do. Sarva guyatamam bhuyaha shrinu me paramam vachaha ishto si me dridham iti tato vakshami te hitam. Because you are my very dear friend, I am speaking to you the most confidential part of knowledge. Thus, hear this from me, for it is for your benefit. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosime. Always think of me and become my devotee. Worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. Sarva dharman prityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishami ma suchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reaction. Do not fear. Idam te nata paskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na cha shushu save vacham na cha mam yasuyati. This confidential knowledge may not be explained to those who are not austere or devoted or engaged in devotional service, nor to one who is envious of me. Text 68. Yadidam paramam guyam mad bhakteshvabidasyati bhaktim mayi param kritva mam evasya samshayaha. For one who explains the supreme secret to the devotees, devotional service is guaranteed, and at the end he will come back to me. Nacha tasman manusheshu kashin me priyakritamaha bhavita nacha me tasmad anya priyatara. There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. Okay, I think that's... or maybe one more. Adyeshyate chaya imam dharmyam sambadam avayo yanam yagyena tinaham ishtasyam iti me matihi. And I declare that he who studies the sacred conversation worships me by his intelligence. Okay, back to text 60. Under illusion, you are now declining to act according to my direction, but compelled by your own nature, you will act all the same, O son of Kunti. Purport. If one refuses to act under the direction of the Supreme Lord, then he is compelled to act by the modes in which he is situated. Everyone is under the spell of a particular combination of the modes of nature and is acting in that way. But anyone who voluntarily engages himself under the direction of the Supreme Lord becomes glorious. Maharaj, would you like to speak on this? So we know just where we would be without the mercy of the devotees and the bona fide spiritual master. So it's imperative, it's very important that we work under the direction of Krishna. because he's saying that one will be compelled to act by their own nature. So if we're not fully engaged in Krishna's service, then we'll gradually become engaged in Maya's service. So we can choose Krishna or we can choose Maya. And that's one really nice thing about having the association of devotees, is that we're around sincere souls who are choosing Krishna and his service rather than choosing to serve Maya. So we should act according to Krishna's direction because he's the supreme authority. He says that the point of all the Vedas is to know him. And as we were just hearing, no one is more dear to him than one who actually explains the supreme secret to the devotees. For them, devotional service is guaranteed. And no one is more dear to him than one who's actually preaching this message of Bhagavad Gita. So in one class, I remember some time back, Krishnendu was saying that to be engaged in devotional service nicely, it's important that we rejoin the Krishna consciousness movement. Not just that, okay, I came to the temple one time and now I've, I'm good to go and I'm comfortable, but that we rejoin the Krishna consciousness movement. And he said the best way to do that is by making devotees, because when you preach this supreme secret of the Bhagavad Gita to the new devotees, they remind you of exactly the different entanglements that you were coming out of. And by preaching this message of Bhagavad Gita, you also have to understand the Bhagavad Gita. And they might bring up doubts that even you didn't realize that you yourself are still harboring. So when we endeavor with all of our energy to act according to Krishna's direction and make devotees, then in that way, we'll be engaged perfectly. And we can become more enthused in our service and in our mission to go back home, back to Godhead, and help others to do so. And there's no better way to be engaged than in making devotees and distributing the books of Srila Prabhupada. Because when somebody comes to Krishna consciousness, then everybody becomes inspired. When there's somebody new in the temple, or even if you just meet somebody on the street and you give them some of Srila Prabhupada's books, you become so enlivened. And when we see that people are progressing in Krishna consciousness, then naturally, someone who's aspiring to become a devotee or someone who is a devotee, they're happy to see others progress in service to Krishna. So there's nothing more enlivening and more enthusing than trying to help others become Krishna conscious and making devotees. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada was explaining how everyone in the material world is under a particular combination of the modes of nature, and he's acting in that way. So that means everyone in the world is completely bound up. There's no room to move. They just have to be pulled whichever way the modes of nature are pulling them. Go look at this movie. Go smell this restaurant. Go taste this fast food and all these nasty things. But when one actually engages in devotional service under the direction of the Lord, Srila Prabhupada says, when he voluntarily engages himself under the direction of the Lord, he becomes glorious. So everything is there for one who engages voluntarily in the service of the Lord. And he also becomes free from these modes of material nature. He no longer has to be a slave of his senses and of his material desires and also of the sense objects. So it's certainly the best way to be engaged in trying to bring devotees back to the Supreme Lord. It's everyone's natural position that they're already constitutionally a servant of the Supreme Lord. So if we just go out and find the people who are a little bit eager to get back to that natural state and stop playing around in the illusion of Maya, if they're just a little bit eager to do that, then we can be a part of that process by giving them the books of Srila Prabhupada, inviting them to the temple, and being fully engaged in helping them actually progress in Krishna consciousness. But I like this verse a lot because it reminds us exactly where we would be if we weren't engaging in Krishna's service. Everyone is compelled by their own nature. So, there's so many places somebody could be if they're not engaged in Krishna's service. Instead of selling the most marvelous books that liberate people from all suffering, they might be selling so many things that actually entangle people in almost unlimited amounts of suffering. So if we fully engage ourselves in Krishna's service, then there won't be any room to divert back to all these old bad habits that we picked up from being dragged around by the modes of nature. If we're fighting for Krishna, then we won't have to fight for Maya. If we're arguing with a Mayavadi about the existence of the supreme sentient being who plays a killer flute, then we won't have to argue with our siblings or our friends about, which team is the best to throw a ball through a net or something like this. If we're cooking nice things for the deity, if we're cooking nice things for Sri Sri Garnitai, from milk and food grains, sugar, vegetables, if we're preparing these things nicely for Garnitai, then we don't have to prepare, the most abominable things. We see every time we go to the plaza, there's not one restaurant or place for people to eat that looks somewhat sane there. We won't have to be engaged in preparing those things for people, old carcasses that have been left in a fridge and transported in a fridge truck for the last 2 years before it gets to the seafood restaurant in the middle of Kansas City, in the middle of the landlocked state in the United States. So by fully engaging all of our senses and propensities and thoughts and words in the service of Krishna, then all those things, we don't have to be compelled by our own nature anymore. I heard in one lecture that that sometimes the people who were in their previous lives as karmis selling things that they shouldn't be selling, they actually turn out to be good book distributors. And so I was thinking, well, then they should know for sure they should keep distributing books so they don't fall back into those habits. If you get busted with a bag full of Prabhupada's books, you might get kicked out of the mall. But if you revert to materialistic habits, there's so many consequences, so many more entanglements that come with that. So we should know that there's no more perfect way. This chapter is the perfection of renunciation. There's no perfect way to actually be renounced in this world and in this Kali Yuga than engaging in the Sankirtan mission of the Lord. Because there's some different types of yogis, and they may try to renounce the objects of the senses. Okay, I won't eat anymore because eating is for a material body and I'm the spirit soul. Or I won't do any activities anymore because acting is part of this world and I'm actually the soul. So I'll just meditate on the Supreme Brahman and things like this. But actually, the real renouncer knows that there's nothing in this world that belongs to me. It all belongs to the supreme proprietor and the supreme friend and the supreme controller of everything, Krishna. So if we really want to be a perfect renouncer, then we can engage all of our thoughts. We can rack our brain on how to make devotees and how to go on, how to push on the Sankirtan mission of the Lord. It's a pushing movement. It's not a coasting or maintaining or lollygagging movement, but it's a movement for pushing on Krishna consciousness, which means distributing the books of Srila Prabhupada and making devotees and acting in the proper way under the direction of our superiors in Krishna consciousness. If it's not that, okay, one wants to be a devotee and a preacher, so they just become a loose cannon
And wherever they go, all of a sudden they're calling up the temple saying, "Can you help me out? I'm stuck on the other side of the Mexican border, but I've got a few of Prabhupada's books." No, that won't help push the Krishna consciousness movement. But under the direction of their authorities, and in a way that actually supports the authorities and supports the temple, one should fully engage in preaching Krishna consciousness. Not, okay, I've learned Bhagavad Gita for a year or two, and now I'll go and I'll start my own center, even though no one told me it was a good idea. Or I'll go back to my hometown because it's a really ripe city. And yeah, it's also right by the beach, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how ripe it is. No, we should act in a way that's supporting the leaders in our movement and making devotees and increasing the book distribution, because in this way, the Sankirtan movement will go on and we and others can become more and more enlivened in our service. And like this, if we're fully engaged in Krishna's service, then at the end of our life, it will be possible to actually think of Krishna. Fully engaged and having good sadhana in order to be fully engaged, then when the time for death comes, we can be assured of Krishna's mercy. For somebody who gives their whole life for preaching Krishna consciousness, going back to Godhead at the end of their lifetime is assured. So if we fully engage in this preaching mission, then with proper sadhana, in sincerity, we can think of the Supreme Lord at the end of life, which is another important priority. So we can go in to the next text. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities, who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Purport. Arjuna was not the supreme knower, and his decision to fight or not to fight was confined to his limited discretion. Lord Krishna instructed that the individual is not all in all. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, or he himself, Krishna, the localized supersoul, sits in the heart directing the living being. After changing bodies, the living entity forgets his past deeds, but the supersoul, as the knower of the past, present, and future, remains the witness of all his activities. Therefore, all the activities of the living entities are directed by this supersoul. The living entity gets what he deserves and is carried by the material body, which is created in the material energy under the direction of the supersoul. As long as a living entity is placed in a particular type of body, he has to work under the spell of that bodily situation. A person seated in a high-speed motor car goes faster than one seated in a slower car. Though the living entities, the drivers, may be the same. Similarly, by the order of the Supreme Soul, material nature fashions a particular type of body to a particular type of living entity to work according to his past desires. The living entity is not independent. One should not think himself independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The individual is always under his control. Therefore, his duty is to surrender, and that is the injunction of the next verse. So, all these different bodies that are flopping around in the material world are a product of the past desires of that living entity. So we should kick out any other desire than this desire to simply serve the mission of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya, the Sankirtan mission, and preach Krishna consciousness to whomever we meet. And that way we can be assured that we won't have to get another material body for fulfilling some type of material desire. There's 8,400,000 different species of life, all to be a custom package for someone for the particular jiva soul to fulfill their particular desires. Somebody wants to fly and he sees the body of the bird, and in his next life he can fly around from tree to tree, branch to branch. Somebody wants to enjoy nice music, and in their next life they can get the body of a deer and be so captivated by nice musical sounds until the hunter comes, plays some song, and bang, he gets him. But if somebody wants to finish up all the business of taking on a material body, which comes with birth, death, disease, old age, and go back to their eternal life, their real life, their spiritual life, which is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge, then they can kick out every desire in their heart except for this desire to serve the Sankirtan mission of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada. And in this way, they can go back to Godhead. They can have a spiritual body, and they can help others get their spiritual body too. Many people are really focused on this material body. But Krishna says here in this verse that this body is more or less a machine. It's made of the material energy. But the living entities who are on that machine, they're made of the superior spiritual energy. And the Supreme Lord, who's in everyone's heart, he's guiding them. So someone might be very attached to their body, and Magadari has explained this before, that he heard from Maharaj, that this material body it's nice. But a spiritual body is much more, that anybody who comes in contact with this Krishna consciousness movement will be much more satisfied if they totally redirect their life and their time and their desires and their attention to just hearing the books of Srila Prabhupada, associating with the devotees of the Lord, taking only Krishna prasadam, coming to the temple, giving some donation for the book. If they invest more and more of their time and energy in this Krishna consciousness movement, we can be sure that they'll be much better off and much more satisfied. Because whatever material body that they might be working towards, whether it's just this body being healthier or a demigod body in the next life where they can enjoy different apsaras and mystic powers and all sorts of things, we know, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that none of those bodies are actually satisfying because all of them come with anxiety. They're temporary. Even the demigods are wondering, when is somebody going to get stronger than me and take my position? So if they get a spiritual body, it's much better. And that spiritual body will only be given to them. They'll only be reinstated in their natural position if they fully cultivate just the spiritual desire to surrender to Krishna, which means surrendering to his pure representative, Srila Prabhupada and his pure representatives. So we can go on encouraging people to take this up because there's nothing better in the world to encourage. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that the living entity forgets his past deeds, but the super soul, as the knower of the past, present, and future, remains the witness of all of his activities. Therefore, all the activities of living entities are directed by this super soul. We heard in class the other day that Krishna has a very big job because sometimes there's a thief, and not sometimes, all the time, these kind of situations are going on in the world, that there's a thief. And due to his past activities, he now has the desire to steal from that home. And in that home, there's a nice merchant. And due to his past activities, he has a desire to protect his home and his merchandise. And Krishna has to figure out the perfect arrangement for both of them to be able to carry out their activities. So he's got a very big job. And that's why he's also the most genius. Krishna is able to figure out all of these things. So it's an even, that's one good example or one good reason for why we should just surrender to Krishna's plan. He's able to perfectly engage every living entity in the whole material universe, in the whole spiritual universe, everywhere. He can engage everyone. Specifically, though, in the material universe, that's where he is situated as the super soul in everyone's heart. That doesn't happen in the spiritual world. It's like when there's Srila Prabhupada gives this example of a carnival coming to town and the sheriff appears there to make sure everything goes nicely. So like that. And once the carnival is gone, the sheriff doesn't have to stick around. But like that, in the material world, the super soul is there in everyone's heart to guide them. So he's making sure that everybody gets what they deserve. And Therefore, we can be confident that there's nothing better to do than to surrender to Krishna's plan, because he knows everything. We forget. We are living in one body. We have a certain group of friends, certain group of family members, certain place that we call home in our homeland. But then in the next lifetime, we've got a completely different set. We've had unlimited numbers of different friends, different enemies, different lovers, different homes, different pets. That's always changing. And Krishna knows exactly what we've been doing in every one of these lifetimes. So he knows how to perfectly engage us. So we can be sure that surrendering to his plan is going to be in everybody's best interest. And like Srila Prabhupada said in the purport, Lord Krishna instructed that the individual is not all in all. So it's not by our own intelligence that we can figure out the way to get out of this material world. That'd be like a fly he's trying to get out of the room. He keeps bumping into the window. But we need the help of some superior intelligence. And that is the intelligence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He knows exactly who we are. He knows exactly where we're at. And he knows what's best for us. So if we surrender to his plan, then going back to his abode and no longer suffering in this material world is guaranteed. O sign of Bharata, surrender unto him utterly. By his grace, you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. Purport. A living entity should therefore surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in everyone's heart, and that will relieve him from all kinds of miseries of this material existence. By such surrender, one will not only be released from all miseries in this life, but at the end he will reach the Supreme God. The transcendental world is described in the Vedic literature as Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. Since all of creation is the kingdom of God, everything material is actually spiritual. But Paramam Padam specifically refers to the eternal abode, which is called the spiritual sky or Vaikuntha. In the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is stated, Sarvasya chaham hridishani vishtaha. The Lord is seated in everyone's heart. So this recommendation that one should surrender unto the super soul sitting within means that one should surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. Krishna has already been accepted by Arjuna as the Supreme. He was accepted in the 10th chapter as Param Brahma Param Dhamma. Arjuna has accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the supreme abode of all living entities, not only because of his personal experience, but also because of the evidences of great authorities like Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyasa. So this is the perfection of life, to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But how will anybody know to surrender unto Krishna unless they get one of these books of Srila Prabhupada that tell them on every page to surrender to Krishna, that tell them on every page, you're not your body, that tell them on every page, you're part of the Supreme. So now it's time to serve the Supreme. So there's nothing better for them to read, because there's nothing better for them to learn. A devotee actually is said to know everything because he knows the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if someone who's meandering in the material world can just get this chance to know that actually the purpose of my life is to surrender to Krishna, then all of his miseries in this lifetime can end. He can actually go back to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna's world is called Vaikuntha because there's no anxieties. But we see in this material world, especially in Kali Yuga, everyone is always full of anxiety. So if we really want to end all of the anxieties in the world and give people the real satisfaction they're looking for, then we can help them come to Krishna consciousness. So we can do that by inducing them to chant the name of Krishna. It's very simple. Lord Chaitanya said that whoever you meet, preach to him Krishna consciousness. And the easiest way to do that is just by telling them nicely, please chant Hare Krishna, and we can show that to them. And people are very eager to do this, actually. There's nothing better. I saw some guy at the college today. He was asking some questions, and then he took some books and he gave a donation, and he wanted to hang around. He had like an hour or two between his classes, and I showed him the mantra, and he said, "I read the Bible. I love to study the Bible with my friend." I said, "Oh, that's great." He said, "You know my favorite verse from the Bible?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "And when Jesus walked on water." I said, "Yeah, that's a really cool one." And I told him, "Here, this is an amazing prayer. These are I explained it to him that these are names of God, and by chanting them, all you can please God." And so we chanted the Maha Mantra, and he was going through it, and he was kind of slowly saying the mantra. And then right when he got to the end, he had a big laugh. He seemed really happy. So people enjoy this chanting, even if they have no idea what they're doing, um, because they're getting back in touch with their real eternal friend, the person who really cares about them, the person who really knows them. That's Krishna. And so just by getting them to chant, we can see they're already relieved of so many miseries right then and there. I remember there was one music festival, and we had a table there to distribute books at, and it was raining the whole time, and people don't want to carry around books in the rain, and they don't really want to do much of anything in the rain. So no one was coming to the booth, no one was taking the books, and we're just hearing all this garbage music and trying to yell over the music to people. So it was a difficult time, at least on our minds. But then a group of people came in, and they said, "How can we make this rain go away?" And we started telling them about the Maha Mantra. And we said, "Here, chant this mantra." And they all started chanting. And then we're clapping and singing, and everyone it broke out into a whole kirtan. And they were so happy. They're in the middle of this whole music festival. They pay money to go there. There's all different varieties of entertainment and so-called enjoyment. But they actually said after that kirtan, they came back to the booth and they said, "This is the funnest place in the festival." They said, "Can we chant that again?" And they brought some friends, and we started chanting again and singing. And at one point they asked, they said, "Will this make the rain go away?" And we said, "No, this will get you back to the spiritual world." And they said, "Do you have one to make the rain go away?" And the devotee I was with, he was very honest. He didn't lie to them. He said, "Rain, rain, go away. Come again another day." I appreciated that because he didn't just tell them, "Yeah, just chant Hare Krishna. It'll make the rain go away." But he told them, "No, this is for spiritual perfection. You can chant the rain, rain, go away mantra if you want the rain to go away." He was very straightforward. So people enjoy this chanting, even if they don't know what it is. We can get anybody to chant anywhere at any time. And these books of Srila Prabhupada, this is Krishna's mercy being put into such a perfect, passable form by all of the Sampradaya Acharyas and ultimately Srila Prabhupada. And then we can just hand them the book. So it's a really special thing. And people can advance in Krishna consciousness and learn to surrender to Krishna if we give them the books, if we give them the chanting, if we give them prasadam, but also if we fully imbibe Krishna's teachings and understand them. And then we can easily impart them to people wherever we go by the mercy of the spiritual master and the mercy of Krishna. So that's another important thing. Srila Prabhupada once said there was a meeting of the devotees after a lot of book distribution was going on. And some of the devotees cleared out of the room, and then Srila Prabhupada explained that in America, they think that these books are, that I've written these books for others. They're just for selling. But they don't know that I have written these books for my disciples to read. And I am authorizing you to read these books 24 hours a day. He said that to Harikesh Prabhu. And there's some other similar examples where devotees were very fired up about their book distribution, but then Srila Prabhupada emphasized the point that he was writing these books for us, for his followers to read and really understand them, just like understanding law books. Many devotees say this quote from Srila Prabhupada that these books will be the law books for the next 10,000 years for this golden age of Kali Yuga. So that doesn't mean we just distribute them to a lawyer or put them in his office and say, okay, have a good one. But it means we actually should understand them. Just like if you go into a courtroom, I haven't been in many, but I know one of my cousins was studying to be a lawyer, and she had to do a lot of different rigorous tests. Like you really have to know everything that's in those books somehow, even though it's mostly mundane information. Somehow you have to be enthusiastic enough and everything to imbibe what is in there, understand it, and pretty much live by it when they're in that courtroom. So if they can do that with just these mundane textbooks, what to speak of the most amazing, the most interesting knowledge of the Supreme? We should be able to do that, and we must be able to do that. Or to whatever degree we can, it's extremely beneficial if we can imbibe these teachings that Krishna is giving in the Bhagavad Gita and that Srila Prabhupada is giving in every purport, then we can easily pass this on to whomever we meet. And we can live by it, we can set a proper example. Okay, the next. Yes, Magadari Prabhu.
I had a comment, Prabhu.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the heavenly planets, and I've been really meditating on this because, like, I imagine, like,
Don't meditate on them too much.
yeah, no, it's philosophically that, you know, like everybody in this world, like the guy with the fancy car, he revs his engine down the street, and he feels very powerful and pleased. He gets a sensation which is physical from that activity, and he also derives some subtle pleasure from understanding how others are perceiving him in a way which, according to his false ego, is a positive perception. So according to his false ego, if others perceive him in a certain way, he derives pleasure from that, from meditating on the perception that others have of him by performing a certain activity. The demigods are also like that, you know, because they're within the modes of material nature. They're also, like you mentioned, mystic powers and enjoying with apsaras. There's all that. Like, you know, they can fly in the sky. And I mean, just like we will think how amazing it feels to do something like that, you know, they're also relishing that temporary pleasure. And actually, when we here in this material world are desiring some sense pleasure, you know, usually if we have some knowledge, we've been with devotees, you know, usually it's going that direction. Like, you know, it's just sometimes I'm just I'm thinking out loud a little bit, but like, say I just want to eat really nice food, you know, I'm actually desiring to enjoy on the platform of the demigods, or, you know, or some other living entity in the material world who has that type of facility more than I have according to my karma. But it's not a very glorious desire. And, you know, my destination is, you know, I'm capping myself. So there's not much, it's not very glorious to desire, you know, material sense gratification, because ultimately we go to be in those heavenly planets if we deserve it according to our karma. And we may enjoy, like you were saying, but it's not, it has its embarrassments, you know, and it's temporary. So I'm trying to think like that, like when I'm doing some meditation on sense gratification, I'm basically saying that I want to stay here. And even if it's in the mode of goodness, I'm saying I want to stay here, in this material world. But when I desire to serve Krishna or to follow Prabhupada's instructions, then I'm saying that I want to associate with Prabhupada, or I want to associate with my Guru Maharaj, or with the devotees, with Krishna. And then it doesn't matter where I am in the material world. Of course, we want to go back home, back to Godhead. From our state, that's a really elevated desire from where I'm normally desiring. So it's okay for us to want to go back to Godhead, because for me, that's a big jump from where I'm desiring usually. Anyway, some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's no better desire than wanting to, what is it? Oh man, there's a really amazing thing that I heard about the desire of the, I'm sorry. I heard a really amazing statement about the desires of the acharyas. But that's the best desire. If we want to please our spiritual master, if we want to please Srila Prabhupada, and if we want to ultimately please Krishna, what better desire is there than that? Because then if we do that, then everybody will be pleased. It's not that Krishna just cares about one group of people or likes some and doesn't like others. He's doing what's best for everybody at all times. So if we please him, then everybody can be pleased. So it's the best desire. And I like that point you're saying about if we are meditating on increasing sense gratification, and we're saying we want to stay in the material world. And I think it's earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, there's nice purports and verses also, but in the purports that explain how material so-called enjoyment or sense gratification, not only is it, saying and like projecting that thought, okay, I want to stay in the material world, but by increasing material happiness, what they are doing is prolonging their duration of material existence. That's why it's miserable, because that's also why that so-called happiness that one feels by trying to gratify their lusty desires, that so-called happiness one gets from contact of the senses with the sense objects, is described as misery, because getting that so-called happiness from the senses interacting with the sense objects, that prolongs one's time in the material world. Because from that interaction, then so many more material desires come. Okay, I wanted to enjoy like this, and I just almost had it, or I got it, but it wasn't good enough. And next time it should be like that and like this. And maybe if I just arrange it that way. So like this, right then, from that moment, there is some sense gratification, then it's just increasing the duration of material existence. But if we do things for the satisfaction of Krishna's senses, then our time in this material world is getting shorter, and the door back to Godhead is open. We're going back to Krishna. If one's senses are always engaged in Krishna's service, I was just hearing Maitreya and Vidura, Maitreya Muni and Vidura speaking about this in the third canto. If one's senses are always engaged in Krishna's service, then by that sincere endeavor to the devotee is keeping the senses engaged in Krishna's service, then the Lord may just glance upon that devotee and further engage them in his service. Because their senses become purified. Krishna will give them spiritual senses to really, engage in his service eternally. And that service has to be done without any motive, without some tinge of my personal happiness, or without any interruption. Ahaituki apratihata. It's unmotivated and uninterrupted. And then one becomes completely satisfied. But as long as we try to get some satisfaction from the material world, only misery. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, when the learned, they don't take part in the temporary happiness of the material world. They don't take part in the sources of misery. The word he uses is yona dukkayaha. That so-called happiness that one thinks they're getting in the material world, it's just the womb of misery. So you keep going for it, and you're sure to get a child of misery, because that's right there, where when one thinks they get happiness from the material world, that's where their misery starts, growing like a womb, and then they'll get it. But as Krishna said here in this really nice set of verses, if we, as he says, deliberate on this fully, and then do what we wish to do. If we wish to do what Krishna is saying to do, then our time in the material world is numbered, and we can help others get out of this material world too and go back to their eternal, blissful, knowledgeable life in Krishna consciousness. Okay, thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai.